So for those of you who didn't hear it the first time, everything stays the same. My websites stay up, my subscriptions stay up, the newsletter stays up, the buzz continues. I'm going to continue hosting the buzz. I'm just going to be hosting it for a different company. I can't tell you the name of the company because the contracts are theoretically being signed tomorrow. When they're signed, I'll be glad to tell you. We're hoping to announce it on the buzz tomorrow night, but it may not actually get announced until Friday. But the good news is, which I'm very grateful for, is that everything that we've worked so hard to create together continues, and that took a lot of work to get done. It's been a long time since I came to visit with you folks, and I have missed it. The reason that I don't attend is not because I don't love Michael, although we are not supposed to talk about that in public, but the fact that I teach at USC, and my class at USC ends at 8 o'clock, and it's really hard to make the meetings, and it's a one-day class on Wednesdays. So I've told USC that LACPUG is much more important, so they're moving my class next year. So hopefully I'll be able to attend more often. But Michael said, Larry, I am so bored. I am just so bored with the traditional presentation that's done. People talk about one piece of software, and it's just boring. I need you to do something different. I want to throw a challenge in your... So I'm going to do something I've never done before. I've never even rehearsed this. We're going to demonstrate two pieces of software at the same time. Never before, and believe me, do not do this. This is only for people that are professionals. Do not do this at home. I don't want anybody injured. We're going to talk about media management in both Premiere and Final Cut 10. What I prefer to think of... Oh, by the way, I can see already the guy sitting in the very back row is about to give me an incredible amount of grief. So to prevent shouting, there are exceptions to everything. Everything. Don't give me abuse about it. What I want to do is to give you suggestions that apply to most editing situations except Michael Thomas. So if you feel, wait a minute, I've got an exception, you probably do. Feel free. There's going to be plenty of time for Q&A at the end because I've only got 5 minutes of prepared materials. So just to let you know, this is general guidance. I prefer to think of Premiere and Final Cut as two software tools separated by a common language. Let me illustrate. The thingy called the master container is called a project in Premiere. It's called a library in Final Cut. A folder is actually called a bin in Premiere, and it's called an event in Final Cut. The edited thingy that you work with is called a sequence in Premiere. It's called a project in Final Cut. Media is called media in Premiere, but it's called managed media or external media in Final Cut. And collections are nests unless they're a compound clip. So if you're wondering about what the heck it is I'm talking about, please refer to column A and compare it to column B or column C, depending upon which side of the aisle you fall on. True for both applications is that any relatively recent computer can edit 4K video. I get so many emails saying, Larry, what computer should I buy? I don't care. My favorite is an iMac. I like the 27-inch iMac. The speed of your storage is more important than the speed of your computer. I know talking computers is far sexier. I know that dealing about whether it's a 2.8 or 2.9 or 3.0 gigahertz CPU really makes a big difference in the discussions you have with your friends, but nobody cares. It's not computers anymore, it's storage. Now, I don't recommend a Mac Mini, except for Michael Thomas, but other than that, I recommend any iMac, any laptop, an old Mac Pro, a new Mac Pro. They can all edit reasonably well. Now, new Mac Pros are going to be better than old Mac Pros, but nonetheless, the power of your graphics processing chip is far more important than your central processing chip. The GPU is everything in Premiere, and most of everything inside Final Cut. More RAM is better. If you have the chance, specify 16 gig, and you will never fill a Thunderbolt pipe. I don't care who manufacturer is talking about it. The hard disks inside and the bandwidth limitations of Thunderbolt 1 and Thunderbolt 2 prevent you from going at rated speed. Thunderbolt 3 is a different issue, but unless you have 40 hard disks inside a Thunderbolt 3 enclosure, you're never going to fill a Thunderbolt 3 pipe anyway. Media truths. Always copy media from your camera or your card to your hard disk. Never ingest or import directly from a camera or card? Yes, you can do it. Yes, it will break. Yes, you will send me an email. And yes, I will laugh at you. Don't do it. Some media formats are harder to edit than others. H.264 is hard. H.265 is impossible. AVC HD is hard. ProRes is easy. DNX HD is easy. GoPro Cineform is easy. So some codecs are designed to be hard to edit to make small file sizes. Some are not. Transcoding, which means to convert, is not necessarily bad, but not always necessary. Mike Horton's opinions notwithstanding, you cannot make informed decisions about editing or technology without understanding codecs. Even if you don't want to, you have to understand them. It is a necessity in today's world. There's over 400 codecs, and there are 5 that you must understand to be successful as an editor. Even if you're deferring all the technical decisions to your assistant, who is always underpaid, and keep that in mind, you still need to understand codecs. So my goals for today, in the time that Michael has given me, which is 4 hours and 21 minutes in case you are wondering, dinner will be served halfway through. We are going to define some key terms about media management. Then I'm going to illustrate key media management techniques in Premiere, then illustrate key media management techniques in Final Cut Pro 10, and then we'll answer questions either in front or in the back until Mike throws us out. So let's start with some definitions. Media management is the process of organizing, importing, and keywording media prior to and during editing. Where possible, you want to manage all your media from within your nonlinear editor. Never, ever move files or media in the Finder when your NLE is open. I won't answer that email. Media management in Premiere emulates Final Cut 7. In fact, Premiere has taken as its design model emulating Final Cut 7. So for those of you that know how Final Cut 7 works at a gut level, then you're going to be completely comfortable with how media management works inside Premiere. Media management in Final Cut Pro 10 offers more options than Premiere, and these options are especially helpful for new users, which Final Cut has turned up a lot of. Final Cut exploded the market, and Premiere took over the market that Final Cut 7 used to contain. Media. Media is defined as the source audio and video elements which are created outside of your nonlinear editor, which you then import and combine to create a finished film or video. This definition specifically excludes project files, scratch, cache, or temporary files, or elements created entirely inside your NLE, such as titles. There's 4 types of media: camera native, optimized, proxy, and rewrapped. Camera native is the media that's shot by your camera. Optimized is camera native media, which is transcoded, which is a fancy word that means converted, transcoded to ProRes, specifically ProRes 4:2, to improve performance during editing and export. There are 6 different flavors of ProRes: ProRes Proxy, ProRes 4:2 Lite, ProRes 4:2, ProRes 4:2 HQ, ProRes 4x4, and ProRes 4x4 XQ. Although it sounds like ProRes 4:2 is sort of in the middle and not that good for quality, even people that hate Apple like ProRes 4:2. They did an outstanding job with that codec. It is a wonderful codec for anything which is shot by a camera. For anything which is recorded by your computer, think After Effects projects or motion projects or screen captures, ProRes 4x4 is a better choice because the colors are different when color is created on the computer, like in After Effects, or color is created for video. I can go into a technical discussion of it, but trust me, the colors are different. ProRes 4:2 exactly matches the colors used by video. ProRes 4x4 exactly matches the colors created by your computer. When I'm doing screen captures, I'm always capturing the screen at a ProRes 4x4 and then compressing it into a 4:2 output, but the capture is done in 4x4. Proxy are low-resolution files created to reduce storage requirements or improve performance on slower systems, and Rewrapped, which is something that I had trouble getting my brain around until Apple yelled at me severely about a month ago. Rewrapped is media which is converted from one container, say MXF, to another container, say QuickTime, without actually transcoding the pictures. The easiest way to think of it is think of a collection of sheets of paper. The sheets of paper are your media, and they're stored inside a file folder. I can change the file folder without changing the paper. That's rewrapping, changing the file folder from MXF to QuickTime. Transcoding leaves the folder the same, QuickTime, but converts it from, say, H.264 to ProRes. Transcoding changes the media. Rewrapping changes the folder that contains the media. Rewrapped Media is especially relevant for AVC HD. Rewrapping as a MOV file improves editing performance because it retains all the metadata. It's very fast and it doesn't change the quality of the image. Remember that stack of paper? We change the folder. We don't change the paper inside the folder. This also can happen with camera formats to record video wrapped in MXF. Definitions. Michael, you can close your ears. A codec. Codec stands for compressor, decompressor, and all a codec is the mathematics that are used to convert light and sound into numbers that can be stored and played back from the computer. That's all a codec is it's a converter from analog to digital. But there's lots of different things that we need. Maybe we need small file sizes. Maybe we need the absolute maximum bit depth for color quality. Maybe we need, whatever our requirements are. There's last count, and I gave up counting a year ago because it was too depressing. There were 400 different codecs, and naturally they're all incompatible with each other. Now, there is no single codec that's perfect for capture or editing or distribution. Examples, as I've mentioned, include AVC HD or R3D or ProRes files. What we're really in now is we're in a 3-codec environment. We use one codec for capture, AVC HD, a second codec for editing, ProRes, a third codec for distribution, H.264 or H.265. The better way to think of this is that we are converting our video from one format to another to give us the best results at that particular part of the production or post-production process. Which gets me to transcoding. Transcoding means to convert, but nobody gets excited about saying, I'm going to convert my video. 0 clients will pay you for video conversion. They will pay you for video transcoding because it sounds so much sexier. Transcoding need not reduce image quality. The best analogy I've come up with is if we have an empty bathtub and I've got a 5-gallon bucket of water and I pour that bucket of water into the bathtub, I'm not going to lose any water because the receiving container is so much bigger than the source. Compression is just the opposite. With compression, I've got a full bathtub of water that I've got to pour down into a 5-gallon bucket. By definition, a lot of stuff is going to get lost because the source is much bigger than the receiver. When the receiver is bigger than the source, you don't have image loss. Engineers will stand and dance on the head of a pin saying, oh, but wait a minute, 1 nanopixel over here has been slightly modified due to the edge differentiation in the compression algorithm used by, forget them. There is no image loss when you're transcoding from a poorer format, H.264, to a wider format, ProRes or GoPro Cineform. There are 2 philosophical, now so far everything I've told you is true in Premiere and true in Final Cut. There's nothing where we have to say yes or no. That's all true for everybody. Now we start to get into some differences. Premiere is designed to edit native media in its native format. This requires a high-performance workstation for best results. Though it can and does edit transcoded media, Adobe makes a big deal of the fact that it edits whatever you shoot. Now, it puts a huge load on your GPU. If you've got a relatively recent computer and you're not dealing with 6K images, that's generally not going to cause a problem. Final Cut, on the other hand, is designed to edit transcoded media, converted from whatever you shot into ProRes. This requires a less high-performance workstation, and although Final Cut can and does edit native media, it's designed to work best with transcoded. Why? By transcoding into ProRes, everything has the same, is the same technical spec. It's all in a 10-bit video, and it's all iframe compressed, as opposed to GOP compressed. When we compress, how many people have heard of chess? Okay, good. I was making sure I'm dealing with a high-end crowd here. Now, if you've ever seen the printing of a chess game in the newspaper, they don't print pictures of the chessboard. What they do is they say, we start with the standard chess, and chess always has the pieces in exactly the same location, always. So to report a chess match between 2 grandmasters who are deeply into the sport and really understand every nuance of how this game is played, all we have to do is to indicate which piece has moved from the prior move. We just say queen's pawn 4 to king's pawn 5. I don't play chess, but just imagine, I just give that one change, which means I can now represent an entire chess match between two brilliant chess masters in a very, very small piece of a newspaper print, because I don't have to take a picture of each frame. That's GOP compression. GOP compression just lists the changes from one frame to the next. Iframe compression is a Xerox machine. Iframe compression takes a picture of every frame in its totality, every pixel, whether they're the same from one frame to the next. Iframes are much easier to edit, like a Photoshop document. You just open a bitmap and there's the image. GOP compression is like a vector. It's all reduced to mathematics and it only lists that which has changed, which means that I've got to find the beginning of that group of pictures, that GOP, and solve the whole equation to get there. Well, that's a lot of background processing your CPU has got to go through, which is why some formats are harder to edit than other formats are. Native media. The benefits to editing native media are that you have generally smaller file size, assuming that you're working with a low-end camera shooting AVC HD or H.264 or some flavor thereof. And I'm not talking Arri Alexa, because Arri Alexa shoots a high-end version of ProRes, and I'm not talking raw images from a Sony. That sort of blows this whole theory. So forget the high-end cameras. Generally, a native media has smaller file sizes, especially at the low end. Editing natively means that you avoid allocating time and resources for transcoding, and you have reduced storage requirements because your files are smaller. The limitations to editing native media is that many video formats are highly compressed, the infamous AVC HD, or even worse, and not to be mentioned in polite society, HDV, or slower render, export, and compression times. GOP-based formats take a long time to render, a long time to export, and a long time to compress compared to iframe formats. Iframe, again, ProRes, DNX HD, GoPro Cineform, AVC Intra, AVC Ultra. Also, many native formats have restricted color depth, 8-bit. 8-bit limits us to a color range of 256 shades of gray, or 1,024 different colors. As soon as we move from 8-bit to 10-bit, I go to 1,024 shades of gray, which makes HDR possible, and 4,096 shades of color, 4 times the grayscale, 4 times the color. As we move to 12-bit or 14-bit or 16-bit, we move from the thousands of colors to the hundreds of thousands of colors to the billions of colors. This is why bit depth is so important. Greater exposures, greater grayscale range, greater color range. Transcoded media, which in most cases means optimized, which is Final Cut 10's word, which means ProRes 4:2, and that's the only format you can transcode into. Has an improved color space because ProRes is 10-bit, has faster render and export and compression times because it's iframe compressed, and it doesn't require as high power gear because it is by definition an easier format to edit. The limitations are that it requires more storage space, roughly 4 to 5 times more than your native media, and it requires time to convert, although Final Cut 10 converts these in the background. So let's take a look first at Adobe Premiere. There's a few things I want to show you with that. I want to show you how to optimize preference settings for performance. I want to show where we store media, where autosave files are stored because it's not obvious, how to configure project settings, and if I have time, a file naming convention for non-scripted projects, because why not? It's cool. So let's talk the demo and see where we are. For demo purposes, you can run both Premiere and Final Cut at the same time. I'm going to be doing that in just a second. Let's just start Final Cut so we can get going in the background. But believe me, they are resource hogs, and you don't want to do this in real time because they both suck up all the RAM you can get. A couple preferences I want to talk about. Let's go up to Premiere and go down to Preferences, General. This is a couple that I want to show you that are really important. See this default scale to frame size? This is off by default. Don't ever turn this on. Premiere in the past, in its past life, when you brought a picture in, would automatically scale it to fit the, no, it wouldn't scale it at all. It would just simply take this object, regardless of what size your project was, and display the image at 100% size, and you had to figure out the scale. See these two choices? Scale to frame size and set to frame size. I know you've often wondered what the heck these things do. What scale to frame size does is it will automatically shrink or enlarge your video or still frame to fit the size of your project, and it sets the scale setting in the motion tab to 100%. This is stupid. What you want to do instead is you want to set it to the frame size. It will scale, shrink or enlarge the photo, and it will automatically toggle the scale to be whatever it is. So if I take a 1080 picture, put it in a 720 timeline, and set the frame size, it's going to scale it to 72%, which means that now I can use the motion tab and believe the 100%, which gives me the highest quality. I automatically screw up the quality if I scale to frame size, but I honor the quality if I set to frame size, and I know all of you do not want to screw up the image quality of the videos that you've spent all this time capturing, so set it to frame size. It has nothing to do with media management, but I was so proud of learning this, I had to share it with you. So, set this to frame size. Back to preferences. So, you want to make sure that this one is turned off, because what there should be is a default to have it set to fail, but it isn't there. I'm going to yell at Adobe on your behalf. Next thing, the autosave. This is where you're able to specify where your autosave projects, how often they're stored. I will show you where they're stored in just a minute. Media, here's a good one. Let's zoom in here so you guys can see this. Media cache files next to originals, I leave this off. I like to have the media cache files stored separate. And right now I've got them stored inside an application support folder. I'll show you this in just a minute. But this is the biggie right here. The media cache database is keeping track of all the different work files that Premiere creates, and you want to clean it about once a week. So every so often, go in here and click clean. It cleans out the database. And it keeps it from just accreting information you don't need. It keeps it from getting too big, keeps it optimized. And the recommendation that I've gotten is to do this once a week. This is a very medium important thing to do. Notice this one down here. This one is on by default. What a growing file is a special form of a QuickTime movie which allows you to edit the file while it's still being recorded. Think sports. You want to edit the highlights at the end of the first quarter, but the game is not over. So you're continuing to record the game, but you can go into a growing file and automatically edit highlights from the first quarter even while that file is being recorded. This is a really cool thing. The problem is this is on by default, which means every 60 seconds your computer is going out to your hard disk saying, oh, by the way, is the growing file any bigger? So it's hitting the hard disk for no reason because we're not working with growing files. So turn this off and automatically Premiere is not obsessing about hitting the hard disk to ask for growing files. It's concentrating instead on editing, which is what you want it to do. Next thing, memory. As much RAM as you have, Premiere wants all of it. So my recommendation is when you go to the memory preference, set this to 3 gigabytes for everything else. When any of the Adobe applications are running, it's going to take whatever memory is left after those 3 gigs and use that for the memory pool for all of your Adobe applications. As soon as you quit your Adobe applications, then all that memory gets released. So if I'm editing between Final Cut and Premiere, just hypothetically, Final Cut wants all your RAM, Premiere wants all your RAM, so edit in Adobe, quit out, go to Final Cut, all your RAM gets sucked back up again. Email, web browsing, all the stuff, word processing, spreadsheet calculation needs like 1/10 of a gigabyte. I mean, that's just the operating system's taking 1.5 gigs. So there's no reason to reserve lots of this for anything except a media application. So my recommendation is keep this minimum to 3. Next, let's see, playback, nope, sync settings. We don't care. Titler, I don't care. Trim, this is a neat one here. This isn't media management, but one of the nice things about the latest versions of Premiere is that the selection tool now is context sensitive. If it's near the out, it's a ripple. If it's near the in, it's a ripple. If it's over both, it's a trim. And if you hold the command key down, it switches from, sorry, it's a over both, it's a roll. And if you hold the command key down, it switches between rippling and trimming. But this is off by default. If you want a context sensitive cursor, be sure you turn that on, which will make your life a lot easier. So those are things that will make Premiere fly a lot faster. Where should you store media? Okay, those of you who have unlimited budgets, first, I can be adopted, and second, you want to buy an all SSD RAID. It's going to cost you $2.5 billion, but you will never look back. It's the happiest moment of your life. You will think that you've died and gone to heaven. It's blindingly fast, and it holds about 2 thimblefuls worth of media, but it is quick. For the rest of us mere mortals, what you want to do is you want to put an SSD drive as the boot drive of your system. A Fusion drive, if you're getting it from Apple, if you can retrofit your own, an SSD drive is a really good choice, because the SSD works best when it's accessing the same information over and over and over and over again. An SSD does not work as fast, I'm not saying badly, but I'm not saying as fast, when it's accessing new media. When you think about editing, you're playing clip 1 and you're playing clip 5 and you're playing clip 8 and you're playing clip 15. You're always pulling in new stuff, which the SSD is not optimized for. The SSD is optimized to do the same thing over and over and over again. So make your boot disk your SSD, make your external drive a RAID. A RAID, if it's got SSD boosting, like flash storage, is perfectly okay. But where you get the performance is harnessing multiple spinning disks into the same device. A good way of guessing the speed of a RAID is to take the number of drives in it and multiply times 100. So a 4-drive RAID set up as a RAID 5 is going to yield speeds around 400 megabytes a second. An 8-drive RAID formatted as a RAID 5 is going to yield speeds around 800 megabytes a second. For those of you that do the math, Thunderbolt 1, which no longer ships, maxed out theoretically at 1100 megabytes a second. Even if I had an 8-drive RAID, I can't fill a Thunderbolt 1 pipe. Nobody ships Thunderbolt 1, they're shipping Thunderbolt 2, which gives us 2200 gigabytes a second, but the headroom is such that we only get 1300 megabytes a second. Even with 8 drives, I can't fill a Thunderbolt 2 pipe. Thunderbolt 3 gives us 4000 megabytes a second. 4000 megabytes divided by 100 means I'd have to have 40 drives, 40 drives in my RAID to be able to fill a Thunderbolt 3 pipe, which translates into ain't gonna happen. So a better way to think of it is don't look at this. The marketing people love writing, this is a Thunderbolt 2 drive, supports up to 2.2 gigabits per second, which is a true statement. Totally unachievable, but a true statement. So instead, what you say is how many drives inside? 4 times 100. Okay, I'm going to get 400 megabytes a second from that RAID. Why do you care? If you're dealing with raw footage, who was I talking to? A film that came out a couple years ago that I'm blanking on, so I'm going to say something like Star Wars, a high-end, but it was the year before. They were color grading stereoscopic 3D. They were color grading stereoscopic 3D in 12-bit depth, and the data transfer rate to be able to do that color grade was 2.3 gigabytes a second. It was so much data that it filled the back plane of the computer. The computer couldn't go faster than that. And that's a stereo. That was a 4K stereo 3D 12-bit file. I mean, the video files these days are monumentally huge. It wasn't the storage. The computer itself couldn't handle the data. So if you're starting to deal with high bit depths, if you're starting to deal with high resolutions, the speed of your storage and how that connects becomes the gating factor on how fast your computer can perform, not the speed of your computer. Speed of the computer kicks in, but you're really going to be gated by the speed of your storage. Yes, sir? No. SSD is always going to be the fastest, always. It's going to cost the most, it's going to be the fastest, it's going to yield the fastest results, but it's going to hold far less just by the nature of SSDs right now.
I just put a 2 terabyte inside my computer.
That's a 4 terabyte right there, okay? And that's just a spinning media. So the answer is, for the amount of money that you're spending, for the same amount of money, you'll get more storage with spinning media, but you'll get greater speed off an SSD. If you're working with small projects, the SSDs are perfect. If I'm doing a documentary or a reality show, first, condolences. Second, you want to make sure that you've got the storage to hold 1,000 or 2,000 or 4,000 to 1 shooting ratio, which is what reality is shooting these days. You can't put that on an SSD until after you've done your selects. There just isn't enough room. 4,000 to 1 shooting ratio, and they call it reality. There's something I wonder about that. A couple of other interesting things. When we create a new project, this is different. This is different from Final Cut 7, it's different from Final Cut 10. I'm going to close this project. It is not true that Premiere can only have one project open at a time. You can actually have multiple projects open at a time, but you can only access one of them for editing. The rest can only be accessed for playback. But Michael hasn't asked me to talk about that, so we'll save that for another time. When you have opening a new project, remember that's the master container, as opposed to the project in Final Cut 10, you can actually specify the same way as you could in Final Cut 7, but specify by project, where your capture files for video, audio, and video previews are going to be. Remember in Final Cut 7, when you go to Final Cut Pro Documents, you could say, I want video files here, and audio files there, and render files. That was back in the old days of G3s, for those of you that remember those, where our hard disks were transferring in dozens of megabytes a second. We couldn't support everything being stored to a single RAID. We had a RAID for video and then multiple hard disks for audio and render files. Here we have the exact same granularity, except we can change it by project. Cool stuff. Adobe has continued to improve the media handling inside Premiere. Now let's come back to this. So I want to talk a little bit about file naming convention. In the past, when we were working with Final Cut 7 and we were capturing from tape, we could capture each individual shot by itself. I dream of those halcyon days of long ago where we could actually keep track of an individual shot and decide on a shot-by-shot basis whether we liked it. Those days are long gone. Now we're capturing entire folders of clips. We shoot it. We got to copy the folder, copy the data from the card to our computer, and make decisions later as to whether we like the shot or not. The idea of selecting prior to bringing it in is becoming increasingly more of a challenge. So in the past, we would name clips. Now we want to name folders that contain the clips. And this is Larry's recommended file naming convention for anything except scripted programs. This just totally destroys a scripted program. But if you're dealing with reality shows or corporates or commercials, this is going to work really well for you. The file naming example is JM03 160330 underscore A01 or 4. Here's how this translates. JM03 is the project code. JM is the client, Just a Moment Productions, AL for Alcatel, Lucent, or anybody else. I give them a 2-letter code that's the name of the client. Then I give it a number code, 1, 2, 3, 4, that is the job for that client. This is the 3rd job that I did for Just a Moment Productions. The cool thing about this is all of my media folders sort automatically by client, and then they sort automatically by job within client in the Finder without me having to do anything special. They're automatically grouped. If I want to say take all of my Just a Moment projects and move them somewhere else, I just have to sort and they're all there. 160330 is the date that I shot this stuff. For those of you wondering, it was, my gosh, that's today. How could that have happened? And then A, it's the A camera, the B camera, the C camera, so you know exactly where the angle is already. And 04, it's the 4th card I shot that day from that camera. So here, just by looking at the name of the folder, I know the client, I know the job, I know the day, I know the camera, and I know roughly when during the day this was shot. Now, this is not to say that anybody else's file naming convention is bogus, but if you don't have a file naming convention, steal mine and use it until you develop one of your own. I've been using this now for 12 years or so, give or take, and it mostly works. I'm not going to say it works all the time, but it's a really good thing when you're stuck. What should I call this? This is where I start. So now let's shift gears and talk about Final Cut. In order for us to talk about media with Final Cut, we have to define the 2 different types of media that exist inside Final Cut. One is managed media, and the other is external media. Managed media is media which is copied into the library. Now remember, the library, unlike Premiere, which is simply an access point, the library is the master container inside Final Cut. Managed media is the best option when working as a solo editor and you're not sharing media between other editors or other projects. How many of you ever had to deal with unlinked media in Final Cut 7? All right, how many of you hated dealing with unlinked media in Final Cut? How many of you throw shoes at your computer because the media, right? We all hated it. It was a disaster. This is Apple's answer to this. By storing all the media inside the library, wherever the library is, there your media is, which means that you never have to worry about media going offline, because as long as the library is there, your media is with it. As I dashed in, I just wrapped up a class at USC, small school you may have heard of. Anyways, I'm teaching, it's a 14-week class. We meet for 2 hours once a week. And in that 14 weeks, I'm teaching them Photoshop, I'm teaching them Dreamweaver, I'm teaching Apple Compressor, I'm teaching Apple Motion, I'm teaching Final Cut, I'm teaching Adobe Audition, and I'm teaching them how to get a job. Not as a filmmaker, but as a communicator, teaching visual literacy. I can't teach Premiere in 3 2-hour sessions, but I can teach Final Cut in 3 2-hour sessions. And these kids are not going to make films. They're going to go out and post on Facebook or create videos for their company, or, I mean, they're going to use pictures to document their lives. They need to know what tools there are to work with. So the focus of this class is not filmmaking, but communication. Managed media is perfect for these kids. Everything gets stored in a library, nothing goes offline, but your library file is quite big because it stores the media. Managed media is stored inside the library bundle, which makes backup and archiving very easy and virtually eliminates worrying about unlinked media because it's all in the library. The opposite is external media. This is exactly the way that Premiere works. This is exactly the way Final Cut 7 works. External media is media which is linked to the library using symlinks, but not copied into it. External media is the best option for media which is used between libraries or shared with other editors because clips are not duplicated in multiple libraries. Clips are simply pointed to exactly the same way that Final Cut 7 used to point to clips. However, because the library now contains only links, if I move that library from drive 1 over to drive 2, the media is still back on drive 1. I take drive 2 on the road with me, open up the project, everything is offline. That's what managed media is designed to prevent. Linked media is good for sharing. Managed media decreases your stress. So now, let me show you some key import settings. Discuss when to, have I talked about native and optimized media? Coming up. Where backup files are stored, and I still got to talk about backup files for Premiere. I got to show that to you. And how to move, copy, combine libraries and events, how to change library properties, and how to change project properties. One of the big differences between Premiere and Final Cut is that once you create a sequence inside Premiere, you cannot make changes to it. Once you create a project, remember project means sequence in this bizarre world in which we are. Once you create a project inside Final Cut, you can always change any of the project settings except frame rate. Frame rate cannot be changed unless the project is empty. If it's empty, then you can change the frame rate as well. So we're going to talk about some of that. By the way, here's my recommendations on native, optimized, and proxy media. This is the 3rd most read article on my website. You use native media when you need to preserve storage space, don't need a lot of effects, and have limited time. You use optimized media for all normal editing operations, especially for color grading. Use proxy media only on slower systems because proxy media is always lower quality. Always lower quality. Now you use proxy media on slower systems or for multicam edits or when rough cutting 4K media. The only exception of editing native media is a good choice when you're editing raw, log, or high-end formats on a high-end system and you want to preserve that 10-bit depth. So, for instance, the best way to work for an HDR environment is to edit raw natively rather than transcode to ProRes because you cannot convert ProRes back to HDR. So you'd want to make sure that you're editing the raw file for HDR. We'll talk again, NAB is going to be blanketing us with HDR stuff. I'm just giving what I've learned so far. I'm planning to have my brain exploded in a couple weeks. I want to talk first about import settings. So let's just import this and go over to here. Events are folders. Now, people got bent out of shape when Apple shipped Final Cut 10. They said, why an event? I'm not a wedding videographer. Forget that. An event is a folder. Why should Apple call a folder a folder? It would make too much sense. All right, so they called a folder an event. It's a folder, unless you're in Premiere where it's a bin. So, and it's a folder. It just holds stuff. It holds media, it holds projects, it holds stuff. So it's a folder. We can add new, so that's the first thing. I like having 2 folders for my small projects. I've got a media folder, you'll never guess what it holds, and I have a project folder. Now, yes, there are smart collections, and smart collections are loved by its mother, but I like having a folder that says, media, or a folder that says graphics, or a folder that says audio. Is there a limit to the number of folders you can create? No. Is there a limit to the way you name folders? They have to be named because these are actual files that are stored in the Mac OS. They have to honor Mac OS naming conventions. But you can call them Fred and Wilma as far as I'm concerned. There's no limit to the number of projects that you can create. By the way, there is a limit inside Final Cut 10. There's a library limit of about 3,000 clips. If you have more than 3,000 clips in a library, you want to set up and move it to a second library. You'll start to have media management RAM issues if there's more than about 3,000 clips. It's very similar to the limitation in Final Cut 7, where if our project file got bigger than 100 megabytes, we knew it was going to corrupt. Same concept. More than 3,000. I'm not saying 3,001 in the world is over, but I had a woman call me up with a tech support question. She said, I've got 10,000 clips in my library and Final Cut's acting flaky. Well, that was a real easy fix. Take out 7,000 clips and move them somewhere else, and she never called me again. So either the system blew up or that solved it. Now, these are the most important choices that you have to make right here. These 4. When you select Copy to Library, you're using Managed Media. You're duplicating the media, and you're storing it inside the library. Leave Files in Place is external media. You're creating pointers, but then you got to make sure you know where your media is being stored. If none of these are checked, you're editing native media. If one of these is checked, you have native media, but you're editing optimized media. If both of these are checked, then you're transcoding to optimized and you're transcoding to proxy. These are the 4 big media management decisions that you need to make when you're importing into Final Cut. You can have native, or optimized, or proxy. So there's 3 different options. How do you know what you're editing? Let's just close this window here. If I select this clip and go over to the info window and go down to the bottom, notice here it says I'm editing camera native and I have proxy files. So this at the bottom of the info window, when you click on info, zoom back out, click on info and scroll to the bottom. The green light indicates that it exists. A red light indicates it doesn't exist. So you can quickly see, what am I doing? If optimized is green, then you're editing optimized. If optimized is red, you're editing native. And you switch between by going up to the view menu and switching between optimized original, camera native if you didn't optimize, optimized if you did, or proxy. If proxy is set here, everything that has proxy files created automatically switches to the proxy file, as this is just done. If proxy files don't exist, then you get this error message saying proxy files don't exist. You can't create proxy files from the timeline. You have to create proxy files by selecting the clips inside the browser, go up to File, go down to Transcoded Media, and then you can specify whether you need to create optimized or proxy. These are grayed out because both of those formats already exist. So again, the red lights and the green lights at the bottom of the info panel tell you, let's select something here, there we go. The red lights and the green lights tell you, green, that particular format exists. Red, that particular format does not exist, and if you want to see what it looks like, click Reveal in Finder. It will show you the clip inside the timeline. All right, sorry, it'll show you the clip inside the Finder. When we work up to here, by the way, the preference setting for import matches the setting that you just did on that media import window. There are 2 different ways of accessing the same data. This will change. This preference settings change. If you change the setting on the import window, it automatically changes your preferences. So the next time you open the import window, these settings from the last time you imported will be matched. So this does not override. This gets changed depending upon how you set the media import window. Let's see if there's anything else here I really care about. And the answer is no. So that's importing. So now backups. Shift-Command, I know you all know that the dock is Option-Command-D, toggles the dock on and off. I have a love-hate relationship with the dock. I love it when it's gone and I hate it when it's there. So Option-Command-D allows me to toggle that on and off. Shift-Command-A opens the application folder. Shift-Command-U opens the utilities folder, and Shift-Command-H opens up the home directory. Inside the home directory, for backups for Final Cut, we go to the Movies folder. Inside the Movies folder is the Final Cut Backups folder, and all the different libraries that you worked with are stored. You can see I've done a few. All the different backups you've worked with are stored inside Movies, inside Final Cut Backups, inside the home directory. With Adobe, it's a little bit trickier. Now hang on, got to go back to my notes. So with Adobe, we go to the Documents folder. Inside the Documents folder, there's an Adobe folder. Inside the Adobe folder, we go to Premiere Pro, and these are the different versions of Premiere. Now, you would think that your backups are in the most recent version of the backup folder, but they're not. They're actually one version back in the 8.0 folder, and here you'll see that there your autosaves are for all your different projects. It also is where the interchange, by the way, is when I'm moving files from Premiere to Audition or from Premiere to After Effects. There's actually a server that's set up that Adobe runs that serves the files between all those different applications, and those interchange files are stored in this folder, which is really cool, and nobody cares because Adobe has done such a seamless job of hiding it that's why it takes a second for it to start up, and then after that it becomes instantaneous. If we go back to Final Cut, if we go back to Final Cut, there's two things I need to explain before Michael gives me the hook. If I select a project here, Command J, anybody remember the keyboard shortcut for project properties in Final Cut 7? Right, Command J. It's the exact same thing in Final Cut 10, just in case you were wondering. When you type Command J, over here on the right-hand side, see this button called Modify Settings. That's how you open up the project settings. And now you can go through and change what you want the video properties to be. Notice that we can edit 5K files. That's just stupid. We can change the resolution. We can change the frame rate. Now remember, you cannot change frame rate with clips in the project. You have to empty the clips out, change the frame rate. We can also change our render formats, etc., etc. I've got proxy files here. Let's go back. Set this to optimized, Command J, click Modify Settings, and then I can change my render formats if I want to. ProRes 422 really is a good choice, unless I'm original in 444, but the rest of the time I'm in 422. So that's project settings. What's new with the release that came out spring last year is when you select the library, it opens up what are called library properties. Library properties allows you to specify where you want stuff stored. We couldn't do this before. Now we can say I want media stored in the library, or when I import media, it will store it in whatever folder I want to store it automatically during the import process. So I don't have to move it somewhere else. I can have Final Cut, import it, flag it, add the metadata, and store it in an external folder automatically. I can specify where I want cache files stored, and I can specify where I want my backup files stored, all by selecting the library, going to Library Properties, and changing storage locations. If I've got media in 2 or 3 different hard disks, and I want to put them all into a single library, I consolidate them by selecting them and say, this is where I want to put them. We can also have it specify exactly where my media is stored and my backup files are stored. If you haven't explored library properties, select the library, it's in the inspector, and take a look. Now there's a lot more we can talk about with media. There's ways that we can move files and copy files, consolidate libraries, transcode media. I've got it all on my website, which is a shameless plug for you guys to visit my website. And let me show you where it is, because it's this is something that nobody knows about. It's like the big secret of my website, because it's so cool. Go to larryjordan.com, and there's a button called Free Resources. You click it, and inside Free Resources, it lists lots of different, you'll never guess, free resources. The reason I mention this is that they're free, okay? Did I mention that this stuff is free? It's a free resource. On the left-hand side, in the first column at the bottom, it's called Favorite Articles. These are all the articles that I think people need to read. Now, they're busy reading about product reviews and this, that, the other thing, but there's a whole section, 15 different articles I've written on media management inside Final Cut 10, and just take a look through that. Free resource. Did I mention that it's free? Free resources, favorite articles, and there's a section on how to run a business, how to price your service, media management, hard disk storage, the sort of stuff that I get all the time. I put them into their own collection, and best of all, it's free. There's lots more I can talk about. I'm here to answer questions after Michael throws us the hook. My name is Larry Jordan. Thank you very much.